Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to another edition of Just Thinking. I'm going to open today's conversation with a quotation from the Nieman Journalism Lab, which is part of Harvard. Communities that have lost their newspaper have seen a decline in voting rates, the sense of solidarity among community members, awareness of local affairs, and government responsiveness. That's the topic today, community news, specifically Holliston news. Where do we get it? Do we get what we want or need? My guest today is Aaron Schachter. He's a Holliston resident with an amazing career in international journalism. He's been all over the place. You might recognize his voice from The World. That's where I mostly have heard it as an NPR listener regularly. But at any rate, the good news for Holliston Cable Access is that Aaron has recently joined the board here. So this is sort of a baptism by fire. Not everybody's required to come on my show just to be on the board. But at any rate, I think this is a perfect time for us to be able to talk about what HCAT's doing, but most specifically about what's really needed. And I try to have this conversation in so many places with so many people. But anyway, we're talking hyperlocal. So let's begin with just one thing. I just want to acknowledge, I know that you spent time in the Middle East corresponding from that part of the world, and I'm sure that you must feel very, I can't imagine what you'd be feeling, but I'm sure that it's sort of a challenging time to watch. So.
Well, it definitely is, because one of the things that you do as a correspondent, of course, is you go back and forth and speak to both sides. And so the average Israeli stays in Israel, and the average Palestinian in Gaza stays in Gaza. But as a journalist, you go back and forth. And so, you know, you really get to feel the pain on both sides, the anguish on both sides, the fear on both sides. Right now, it's a terrifying time to be in Gaza. It's a terrifying time to be in Israel. There's still rockets falling, and of course, the attack from last week was just incredible and awful. Yep,
and I'm sure it drags up both good and bad memories for you in terms of people, and then some worry about where are they. And that, as I say, I want to acknowledge it because I'm sure it's a difficult time for you.
I do want to point out, though, that I did work here in Boston for GBH.
Yes, you did.
For a number of years, and that was not hyper-local, but local news.
Definitely. Well, it's interesting that you say that, and that's actually a perfect segue. I went onto Facebook, and I just threw out on my own page, and I have no idea how, I don't even know who my friends are on that. But it was basically, what do you consider local news? And 99% of the people do not think of Holliston news as local news.
Yeah.
They think of regional, Greater Boston news. Some were quick to point out that they think of the world as being local, and it's like, well, I understand that perspective, because I certainly glue my ear to WGBH all the time. Take out the W now, I know, but at any rate. But I think all of that is very, very apropos of the conversation. I know there are a million things we need to do regionally, nationally, internationally about media. I am only focusing on Holliston.
Okay.
And in 2005, I started one of the first hyperlocals. It was before Holliston Reporter. I spent a lot of my own money finding somebody that would try this with me and set it all up and do all of the technology. And I tend to be most interested in government. Now, to me, government is news.
Absolutely.
Okay? To a lot of people, what the Lions Club is doing is news. To a lot of other people, what their neighbors and friends are doing is news, those warm and fuzzy stories. So what I discovered was that I was able to go to just so many meetings. And then I could not go to any more, and come home and report on them. And there weren't enough people who cared about that.
Right.
But to me, that was the news.
They're not always that fun. I mean, that's the way I started in Lowell, Massachusetts, doing school committee and city council meetings. And as you know, out of 4 hours, often there's not much that you would call news.
Yep. When I started, I was a stringer, and I got 25 cents column inch, and it was like, long meetings and short columns.
Sure, right.
But at any rate, so I think one of the first things and hardest things is that when people move here from other parts of the country, or God, now other parts of the world, and they try to figure out our government system.
Ooh.
Overwhelming. I think they must just about zone out. How do we overcome that? What do we have to do? Any thoughts?
Well, I don't think it's just someone coming from overseas. I mean, there are a lot of people who live here who have no idea how the government works here. And having just had our town meeting, I've asked a lot of friends, did you go, did you watch it on HCAT? And most of them had done neither, though some did go because there are issues, and this is something we'll get to, I'm sure, is everyone has oftentimes something that they are interested in, whether it's the closing of Lowland Street or building baseball fields or sewers downtown, whatever it is, people attach to something. And I think, to your point, that's the way to get people engaged, is to not decide that it's only government or it's only the Lions Club or it's only kids' sports or whatever, but to sort of give people a smorgasbord of information, of news, so that something will catch them.
Okay.
Something will hook them in to, whether it's HCAT or Holliston Reporter, or, I mean, if you look at the Facebook page we have for town, a lot of people are engaged in.
That's true.
Whether it's a fox or a coyote crossing the street, right?
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing where I think you can really grab people.
I wonder if people understand that, like, the Holliston Reporter or HCAT is a bunch of volunteers who are not getting paid to do any of the work. So when I report for the Holliston Reporter from a select board meeting or something like that, you know, I'm doing that just out of my own whatever. And, you know, when I shut off the light at 11 o'clock and go to bed,
your job ends.
My job ends,
Right.
That's it, I'm done. And there will be no paycheck, but nobody gets paid, you know? So I don't think people understand that. I don't think, and so it's hard to recruit people to then, hey, would you help by coming to cover some of these meetings?
Sure, but I also think that we don't let people know that the possibility exists enough so that they can get involved. I will say one thing, as much as I am for the local delivery systems that we're talking about, HCAT or Holliston Reporter or whatever it is, it does concern me sometimes that we are volunteers because I mean, I've never noticed a particular perspective in the articles that you write, but some people at some point might come to this with a particular perspective and either misrepresent things or leave things out or, I mean, in a lot of cases what happens is because of these systems, you don't ask questions. Right, you go to the meeting, you see what happens, you go home and write it up as you said, but you don't hear something in the meeting and think, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, and then go challenge one of the members of the board. So there's got to be, and I'm sure this is what we'll talk about, is how do you fix that problem?
Okay, let's go there.
And
let's go there because
well, I've written my prescription down right here.
What I do is, if I do have questions, I have easy access to all of those people. That's the good news.
Yes.
Okay, and the good news is that anybody who's been at Holliston Reporter has always, because it's changed hands a couple of times, has always had that kind of access. So anybody who's served, who's has been willing to come back.
We all have that access, don't we? I mean,
you do.
We can
you
do
could do it yourselves.
Right.
But the reality is that sometimes it just doesn't work out. I mean, you don't figure it out until it's 10 past 11 and you say to yourself, hey, damn, I should have asked that. Well, I'm not going to wake him up to ask him. Right. So, how do we get, to me, we're talking about, we're getting the news. How do we keep to a standard? How do we keep some sort of standards? Because that's the part that I quiver with, because I do very much believe in the standards of journalism. I don't view it as I think the hatchet job that's been done on that profession has been painful to watch, okay? And so I don't think it's fair. I don't think people fully appreciate how hard it is or how important it is to have those journalists who can point out, and this is one of my pet peeves, businesses or private people who violate permits and that we're chasing in court. Does the public need to know that? Well, to me, the answer is yes. And the reason is because you want to know that your government is following through on all these goofy rules that we invent.
Right.
Okay? Well, how do you do that?
That's a good question. How do you do that?
Well, it used to be that you had stringers from newspapers who sat through all these boring meetings and who would do that. But then, how do you do that today?
I wish I had a solid answer. One of the things that I'm very excited about recently has been nonprofit news, and I mean, clearly the shining example lately has been what ProPublica has been doing with the Supreme Court. That is a nonprofit news operation. And there is a lot of talk, I think, about bringing that model to local communities. I don't know how local it will get to the point where we report on the permit violations, but it will certainly drill down more into communities than what we have now. We are lucky, we do have a diminished Metro West Daily News, which is I think a pretty good paper. It can't do it all because, again, as you say, the number of journalists there has been reduced. So I'm really hoping that this nonprofit model will somehow get a start. I mean, it's similar in a sense to what we do at HCAT, right? We found a revenue stream.
Yeah.
So we are able to produce the things that we produce. So I don't think it's terribly far-fetched that could be a solution.
The future, or at least some for some.
For some in some places,
yeah.
Right? There's still going to be news deserts in places where the people don't feel it's worthwhile.
Or that they just don't have the capacity.
Or they don't have the capacity.
You know, I mean, we sit in a very rich community, and I don't just mean monetarily. Right. This whole region is second to the Silicon Valley for, education and money, and, we live in our own little bubble. Doesn't mean we have to be blind to the fact that we're in a bubble. But going back to the idea of the nonprofits, have you heard of the Ground Truth Project too?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
of course.
So I mean, that's another one where, they're taking individuals and putting local reporters, young folks coming out of college. Oh, what an opportunity! And putting them into an area perhaps where they have no familiarity, and so the kid from Nebraska ends up in whatever, Framingham,
Cape Cod,
whatever, and has no idea what it's about, but. I think those are very exciting, and I think that in hindsight, I wish I had done a nonprofit for mine because that allows you a revenue stream. You can raise money separately for the support of the operation, and just to keep it going, and even just to be able to pay people some token amount of money to be your eyes and ears. Respect them enough that their time is worth something.
Right.
That's one of the things I don't understand. Why don't people want to pay for the information they get online?
Well, I don't know. I look at, 2 or 3 Israeli newspapers every day. I look at the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Metro West Daily News, Worcester Telegram. I mean, it gets to be quite a bit.
Yep.
Because it is so accessible, you expect it to be there. And it is a very good question, but I do think I would go broke if I pay for a bunch of those.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not getting some of those free because I get them myself. Or if you are, then you have a trade secret.
No, I'm not. But I get the articles that I can that are free or whatever, but you'd go broke.
Yeah, you would.
Trying to keep in track of everything.
But I think at a local level, if we just keep it down to, could we convince folks in town to spend $6 a month to get news
I think
about,
you could.
That's kind of where I'm coming from. It's not that we're talking about megabucks, but if you get enough people who are willing to contribute to this nonprofit and that you're willing to sort of have this foundation of information that comes in, and maybe more contributions in much the same way that GBH does it, so you get invitations to special events or whatever if you're a bigger contribution.
It's a great idea, and as I said, I do think it is. I hope it's not the only future, but I do think it is a great option moving forward, considering where things have gone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, what would be the first thing that you would suggest that let's just take not this show as much as just local media for that outreach piece? How do we get the people who haven't been here? How long have you lived here?
Almost coming up on 13 years.
Okay, that's not so new. How have we not known you? How have we not, you were probably gone a lot. I don't know.
I was working quite a bit.
Yeah. The thing is that how do we find people? How do we connect?
Well, I mean, because of my position, a lot of people connect with me.
Well, good that we're going to use you.
Which is nice.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people who would want to do this. The issue is, and I must admit to being one of them in my career, I would not have wanted to work in Holliston, Massachusetts. I wanted to work in Boston, New York, Los Angeles, Jerusalem. But we need to find people who want to do this kind of work and tell these kinds of stories because they're so interesting. I'm not sure everyone is quite as excited about the permitting process as you are, but I mean, just again from the town meeting the other day, there was a lot going on, and even if you didn't understand what each warrant item was about, you saw there were people standing up and they were interested in it, and why are they interested in it, and what does it mean? And certainly there are lots of things that have in town recently that have caught people's attention. The industrial park 555 two industrial park issues, right? Have been pretty interesting, and when I've been at friends' homes and they've seen this 555 sign and they go, "What's this 555 thing about?" And I have this conversation and then they get all incensed and they feel we shouldn't have trucks or they feel we shouldn't hinder the ability to get taxes, whichever side. But it takes something to get people engaged, right? You gotta figure out how to get them interested, and I think there is an if you build it, they will come aspect to all of this. And I'm optimistic about the idea, people paying $6 a month to get real local news.
I hope you're right. So when town government sends out a newsletter about the activities of town government, is that news?
I wouldn't call it news, no.
Yeah.
When they do the activity, maybe there's news.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't either. And
I do say something has to happen.
Well, somebody has to be a little bit neutral about, reporting on. If government's writing it from their perspective. They're not asking themselves probing questions about why they did it that way or how they got there or what went amok along the way. It's a little bit different, which is what, the journalist is supposed to be doing.
This actually brings up a great point that I wanted to discuss with you.
Okay.
There's an organization in Worcester which has seen, it's not a news desert, but it had many more news options than just the sort of the Worcester Telegram, which has really been broken apart, unfortunately.
Who owns Worcester Telegram now?
I don't know.
Maybe the same ones that own Metro West.
Yeah, it does seem my passwords seem to work for two different papers.
But we won't say names.
A group called the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, with great fanfare, announced that they were going to create a journalism outlet of good news, because we need good news in the world. But
Not all news is good.
Well, no, it's not even that. It's the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, which is made up of businesses
True. Yeah.
in and around Worcester.
Yeah.
So they are essentially going to do what you said, which is government reporting on government, or people employed by the government reporting on government. And there's no, I mean, NPR has government support. The British Broadcasting, BBC, has government support, but they're completely separate from the government. I'm not sure how separate this kind of publication might be. And it seems like a great thing, right? Another local outlet. And I'm sure it will serve some purpose. Right, it'll let people know about restaurants or whatever the chamber is promoting, but it's not going to hold people to task, which is what you really need.
Unless they
local media
decide
to do.
create a board or some sort of entity that's broader than the business interest of this. Okay, so that start pulling in, a couple of government officials, a couple of school officials, a couple of thises and that's. If they were to go that route, I mean, I suppose that could work, but. All of this stuff is new. This is all new.
It's all new,
we
right.
have no clue, and we don't know what we're doing. We know how to write, we know how to report, but we don't know what we're doing in this new environment. I mean, there was a day when I'm writing the 300th anniversary history of Holliston since 1950, and it's not just me. There are a whole bunch of people, but. I'm the one that's coordinating it, so everything comes through me, and all of the stuff that I read reminds me of how many newspapers we used to have access to. Okay, weeklies and dailies and multiple times a day, so 2 what were Framingham News at the time, or 2 Milford News each day, and the Natick paper that came out every week, and there were 2 Natick papers that came out. So, I mean, and even at that time, we were complaining that we didn't get enough ink. I mean, I remember we had battles with these. We'd have the editors come in and we'd say, we're just not getting enough ink. There's so much going on in this town. You've got to do better than this. And it's just, today it's like, wow, you had no idea how good you had it,
Oh, I mean, it's funny. I wish more people were like you and so excited about everything going on, right? Because that's ultimately what you need, whether you're talking about nonprofit or reconstituting some of these outlets that have lost journalists, is you need interest.
There's so much apathy. People are tired of this stuff.
Yeah.
I think the national picture has made all of us tired. I'm certainly not the passionate news hound that I used to be, because I get so tired.
Depressing.
It's depressing. Yeah, it's depressing. It's the bottom line. And the next year, I mean, is going to be enough to make me just, suicidal. It's just, God, I just dread it.
It's going to be a roller coaster.
It is. But I guess coming back to one of the things that I've noticed, and again, this history thing, in the last 10 years, the demographics of the town have changed. Not humongously. I mean, we used to be, 96% white. Now we're only 86% white. Now, that's not a lot of change, but in a 10-year period, it's a noticeable change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? And so at the school level, one of the first things they were challenged with was English as a second language. Okay, and it started there. So it's those little things about getting people engaged and involved, because if you don't have language, it's really hard to engage. Okay, so I bump into situations where I hear of families who are here that come from Vietnam, being the one that is my most recent, conversation that just bugs me, and somebody who has no language, doesn't speak English, and yet had some issues that needed to be addressed within the setting of government. How does government do that? Well, in my mind, it is some journalist, somebody there saying, hey, we have this issue.
Forces change, right.
Let's
That's a great story.
Which says, hello, folks, I found a problem. And it's one that I think you need to start thinking about, because diversity isn't all just one thing. It's like 9,000 different things. And how are we doing it? How are we handling it? And it is a great story.
I did that story from Hopkinton, by the way.
Did you?
Because they're their increase was
it's staggering.
incredibly dramatic because of the creation of all those
Condos.
the housing developments, and the condos. And you know what? Because I was so excited about it, I told all my friends about it, and they got excited about it. And wow, what an interesting story!
Yeah.
I guess I'm not shocked, but it's interesting that it's happening here, which I did not know.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And at the same time, when you have the conversation about that language barrier for someone who's trying to navigate a system, you also bump into the reality that some of the neighbors, or at least one of the neighbors, is bullying, and the children are having issues, and it's like things start to mushroom, and you start to realize, oh wow, this thing that started out with just this tiny little question about how do you get this person to get through a government process really is just a much bigger ball of wax.
And becomes much more interesting.
And it's much more interesting, and you'd like to put it somewhere. You know, and at some point, once I finish the book, that's what I call it now, is the book. Once I get that done, then I'd like to go back to being able to do stories like that. And so, yeah, I'd park it at Holliston Reporter, for lack of any place, and then post it on other, social media. But I'd like to find, some methodology that you could kind of reliably and predictably know where to go to get something.
Right.
That's the difficulty with the way things are now. You might see it on Facebook. You might see it on Holliston Reporter, but because it's just all so constantly shifting, when you want it again, it's sometimes hard to find it.
Well, a friend of mine has created a newsletter, which it doesn't have a very pretty name. It's called Worcester Sucks, but I love it.
It pretty much tells it all.
Which does, in fact, tell it all.
Yeah.
And it's he is a pit bull when it comes to local government and holding them to account. And he's gotten quite a following. And to your point, he doesn't put a paywall up, but he asks you with some frequency that you contribute. I'm a subscriber, and it's, I don't know that he can make a living at this, but it's working. He continues to do it. I think now it's one of his jobs, but it's been a great service. And there are two issues that I think are very important about this that are slightly different from what we're talking about. The first is that he makes no bones about the fact that his opinion is part of this, right? His name is Bill Shaner. But also, he's a fantastic reporter. And he does, in fact, ask the questions, and he'll tell you that he asked the questions, and he'll tell you whether they were answered and how they were answered, and how the person felt sometimes about being asked that question. And it's an incredible piece of journalism. One of the problems we have now, of course, is that there is opinion masquerading as journalism. Bill is not masquerading. He's telling you you how it is.
Yep.
And that to me is terrifying. I get articles from my parents.
Did you know this was going on?
Did you know this was going on? And you read and it says Joe Smith, and you say, who's Joe Smith? And Joe Smith is a guy who felt strongly about this thing and wrote something about it. And my parents, sorry to throw them under the bus, but my parents are taking that as news.
I know.
It's not news.
That's the first thing is we've got to get this. We've got to get the language. We've got to find a new way to express this.
Well, people call it infotainment. I don't know that that's caught on.
But I just think that Evening News with Walter Cronkite never suggested for a moment that it was his opinion. You know what I mean? We knew that the news was the news. That's why kids didn't want to watch it. It was boring.
It was boring.
Some
Eat
kids.
your vegetables, kids.
As some kids. I liked Walter Cronkite. But anyway, so now, jumping into today, I really think that word itself has become part of the problem because it's just so abused.
Well, this will show you what a news dork I am. When I was a kid, my parents gave me an album, a record of news events. It's almost silly to think about, but there was the Hindenburg disaster, which was, horrific, also spectacular news event. The bombing in London, and it was really incredible for me. I mean, I knew that I wanted to do this for a long, long time, and I've been. I listened to AM radio as a kid, and this is very important to me. Mm-hmm. And I guess I got very frustrated, and I'm going to call out Fox News here, not because of its politics, but because I think it was the first one to do this infotainment and call it news. Yeah. And so, someone will say, I saw on Sean Hannity last night that something. Yeah. Well, you can love Sean Hannity. I'm not knocking that. It's just that that's not news. That's Sean Hannity presenting a slant on the news. It's an opinion program masquerading as news, in my opinion. And I would argue that much of, CNN went the other way and sort of went in a liberal fashion and does, when they are not reporting from the ground in Israel and Palestine, they have gone much the other way as well, gone to that infotainment system as well.
And all I think that ends up doing is dumbing down the public to the extent they expect everything to be this sort of pitch. There's a different pitch to what they do, and I don't just mean an audio pitch, but I mean there's a
fever pitch.
There's a pitch to it. I'm sorry, I can't give you another word. And so then the regular news really does. I mean, that permit issue for me is really boring because it doesn't have any bells. It doesn't have any whistles.
Up that,
I've got to find a way to jazz it. But so I think that it then it contributes, and it is part of all of our dependence on our little telephones and the way things are presented and the instant gratification and the fast beat.
Well, I will say a couple things about the permit issue. One is that, and again, this has to do with the ability to find personnel, because there's so much space now online. You could essentially write about everything, and someone can choose to be engaged or choose not to be engaged. Given that, though, there is often a personnel issue. I mean, we don't have enough people to do all the stories, and so you really have to decide, is this interesting to J&Q Public, or is this only interesting to Mary Greendale?
Well, see, and in Mary Greendale's case, the reason that she thinks the reason I came to the point that it was interesting is because it is such a micro thing, such a teeny little thing. And yet, in the old days, and boy, I can honestly say old and mean it because I've been doing this for such a long time. But in the old days, we got that information in the newspaper. Okay, that would say the permit's been filed.
Sure, because there were people to cover it.
Okay, so somebody was covering it, so we got that information. Well, it did two things. It alerted us to their issue. It educated us about, we're not supposed to do that. I mean, how did I know I wasn't supposed to have, if this guy just got caught for throwing something in the wetlands? Ooh, I've been throwing my leaves into the wetlands. Right. Does that matter? Okay, so there are those 2 points. But there's also the fact that I got to know who those officials were, the elected officials or the appointed officials, as they made some sorts of judgments about these things, or they had conversations about these things and just made, even the 2-sentence throwaway. So now I have a connection with that person who's sitting there serving me in a capacity that I never see otherwise. Don't have that at all. And it's true for even people who are as engaged as I am. It would take me a lot to be able to go through and name every person that's on every elected. There are 44 elected officials. I think I can do it, but I'm not positive. Although somebody recently resigned from the library, and I don't know who it is, so I'm completely messed up.
Well, if you can't do it, then no one can.
Yeah,
So.
at this point in time, nobody's wasting this much time on it except me. So, at any rate.
I have to say, though, you had the quote from Neiman at Harvard. There's also the Poynter Institute in Florida, and this is a big deal. This local news thing and the news deserts. Both public radio stations I know, GBH and WBUR in Boston, are promoting themselves as local news organizations. And they are absolutely, to the extent that they can. But a lot of what has to happen, to your point, exactly the same thing about the permitting is they will go to a reporter from one of the radio stations will go to Lynn and do a story about someone throwing their leaves in the wetland. And you have to extrapolate, Mary, in Holliston, that, oh my goodness, that didn't work in Lynn. I wonder if I can do that here in Holliston. And that's kind of where we are at the moment because of staffing.
Yep.
Right? It gets back to that. And it's, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great service that they have people going around the state and doing these stories, because a lot of them do affect us in one way or another wherever we are.
Yep. Yep. Well, in the back of my head, my voice is rolling around saying, now, how can we use Aaron? Let's see, can we do a public event and have him come and talk about international communication and what it's like to be out there and try to inspire some people? There are people who actually still go into this field, so when we hope that you can,
people.
And tap into Framingham State. I mean, is there anything there? I don't know anymore. I used to know more about it than I do now. But start tapping into another generation that's interested in this stuff, and maybe build our own little farm team. I don't know.
It's not a bad idea.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm always good with the ideas, but at any rate, it's the execution that gets to be challenging. So what do you think? Have we covered this? I think we have pretty much.
Do you have any more?
Oh.
Look, can I just say?
Yeah.
From what I have seen, the journalism programs are still going like gangbusters. I mean, they are full at places like UMass, my alma mater, Northeastern, Syracuse, certainly, Boston University. I mean, these schools have fantastic programs, and they're not lacking for students.
Yeah.
That's
encouraging.
It is very encouraging, and to your point, the question is how to get them engaged, or how to get them employed even.
At a local level. And by
local
local,
level.
It might not even be, when I say local, it could be what we used to have with the Framingham, Natick, Holliston, Hopkinton, Ashland, that sort of local, okay? So if you think of that as being sort of that core environment, now what can you do with that?
Right.
When you've got a lot more opportunity, you've got a lot more people that could provide financial support, you've got a lot more audience, very much more diversified in terms of both the demography and the kinds of work that people do and living situations and stuff. So, I mean, I think that whatever we do here has a promise of being able to be connected to others, because Hopkinton's doing some stuff too,
right, of course.
And so I think gradually maybe we knit these pieces together.
Well, I mean, I don't know if this seems silly or not, but I'll get back to our town's Facebook page has a lot of engagement.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is, where do I find a plumber? But there's also, what's that thing happening at the intersection of 126 and Washington Street, and why are they digging up my street? Does anyone know? And clearly I mean, in this case, hundreds engage, right? But I don't know what the formula is, but if hundreds engage, there are many hundreds more who are looking on and choosing not to comment, right? I mean, public radio has a formula for how many people are donating versus how many people are listening. But clearly enough donate to keep the news coming, and maybe your dream is not so silly.
Yeah, Well, I'd like to hope not. I mean, it's funny, one of the first things, I think it was 1972, I was out looking to buy the Dover Reporter, which was a newspaper that was going out of business, and I wanted to buy their equipment because they had they had the title setter and the whole 9 yards. I mean, this is when it was first becoming computerized, But at any rate, so it's been my entire life here has been about this, trying to get people to know and to understand.
Well, don't ever stop.
Well, I will someday.
Not someday
Hopefully
soon.
not
Let's
soon.
hope. Yeah.
Okay, Aaron, this has been fun. Thank you, and I am going to keep thinking about. I think you have a perspective and a worldliness about that perspective, and as relates to communicating with people that I think we can tap into. So thank you very much for spending time with me.
Well, thank you. This has been great. It's something I'm very excited about, if you can't tell. So I appreciate the opportunity.
All righty, thank you. And folks, thank you very much for being with us. We'll catch you the next time around. Actually, the next time around is going to be an extension of this conversation, specifically with folks from HCAT, because they're rolling out a new logo, a new look, and trying to reposition themselves and perhaps for the community and create a different way that we get our information. So, okay, you take care in the meantime. Be well. See you soon.